Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
On today's episode, we will explore the delicate balance between art procrastination and the importance of taking breaks in the creative process. If we haven't produced new work for some time, doubts may start to creep in a little bit. Am I taking a break because I actually need it? Especially if I want to avoid burnout, or is there an element of fear lurking about of why I'm, feeling that resistance to create work?
Exactly. And those are all great questions. But first, we need to understand what exactly is the art of procrastination. So this is defined as the act of delaying or avoiding engaging in artistic activities, tasks, or projects, despite having the intention or desire to work on them, which is, of course, the very formal definition. But when it comes to our creative process, I think we can all relate to this feeling of mentally, we're like, oh, I have this idea. I want to do this one day. I want to do that. But for whatever reason, we're putting off creating. We're putting off exploring those ideas or really even completing a project, even though we feel like we want to, but there is something holding us back, which can be triggered by that fear of failure or perfectionism, self-doubt, or even a creative block. Maybe you get a project 80% there, but you're not quite sure what that last 20% is. These are all parts of art procrastination.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few ways to get around it. We do have episodes on overcoming creative blocks, if that's where you're feeling right now. But to give you the quick bites of it, you're thinking about breaking those goals into smaller pieces as one way to try to get around it. Maybe it's a big grand idea. Break it down. What can you do today? What can you do this week, this month, etc. Another thing is scheduling the time to make work, even if not feeling inspired. To me, this one's huge, especially after a big project and you feel drained. Extremely important. Whether you feel inspired or not, you need to show up and try to work through it. And then the other one is doing creative warm-ups. A lot of times that inspiration comes while you're working, while you're creating. Maybe you're doing a doodle while dancing. I don't know. It doesn't have to be anything that has a specific end product or end result, but you need to get going. If you're just sitting around thinking about getting into the studio or into your workspace, and then you're just kind of getting stuck and like spinning the wheels a little bit, a lot of times you just need to go in the space. And it might not be that first day you come in. It might be a few times afterwards where it just kind of that engine starts to warm up again, right? But the power of taking a break basically lies in that idea of, if you're always going, if you're always go, 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 which we can all relate to that, of course, especially when you do have the flow going, you can have a little bit of that mental or emotional fatigue of like, I just gave my all, I got nothing else, right? And that's where taking the breaks can allow your mind to rest, recharge. You can gain fresh perspectives. It can even help prevent burnout too. And as a positive side effect, you may have enhanced creativity, improved focus, and even have some increased productivity. But this is a little bit different from procrastination, of course. Like one, you're going to feel the resistance. The other one, we're talking more about like actually taking a break and like stepping away. You have to like figure out which of the two it is, really.
Exactly. I think we've all felt that feeling of taking a very intentional time, a break from your creative practice. When you come back, you have that enhanced focus, you have that increased productivity, just wanting to hit the ground running, which reminds me of a story that I heard a few years ago, and I'll try to keep it short when I'm summarizing it. But essentially, if you think of two different people, they both have an axe and their job is to chop down a tree. Then, okay, they're both chopping, chopping, chopping. The first one never takes a break. Slowly over time, their back starts to hurt. They're fatigued, but they're still chopping away. Well, a second person, they're take a few hits, then sit down and take a break. Okay, chop a few more, take a little break. And the one who takes the breaks end up winning. So the one that didn't take any breaks is like, what the heck? How did you chop down that tree? He says, well, every time I was taking a break, I was sharpening my axe. Well, the first guy who was just going, the axe got more dull. He was getting more fatigued. And so thinking of that break time as sharpening your axe so that when you show up for your creative practice, you are more intentional. And figuring out what breaks are right for you is different for everyone. So maybe you want to prioritize short breaks during your work sessions. Let's say every 45 minutes, then you take a 10-minute break, or every 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break to make an even hour. Scheduling days off in your schedule, saying this is a day where I am intentionally not doing anything art related or business related, whatever you feel like you need a break from. Or scheduling longer sabbaticals or vacations, maybe once a quarter, once every 6 months, to intentionally recharge that inspiration, especially if you're balancing another job or having family life, other responsibilities and commitments. It can really be draining to balance all of those hats. So not taking the time for you has that trickle down effect when you are juggling so many things at one time.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're not taking enough breaks, that can increase that sense of overwhelm of all the things you want to catch up to, or even a sense of dread of like how much work XYZ is going to take. And then you just kind of like push back on it. Versus if you're taking the breaks and you're giving yourself that chance, like you said, to sharpen your axe, to refresh a little bit. I think that honestly can decrease that feeling of procrastination, because now you're like, oh no, I got this, like I'm good, and I know I can do a short session and pick up where I left off, not like, oh, I have this looming mountain about above me and I don't even know how to start climbing, right? But next up, we do want to talk about different tips that we found to find the balance between those two and trying to figure out like which one's which. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artists podcast supporters.
If you have gotten value out of listening to our podcast, please consider becoming a supporter for $4 a month. This podcast is our way of sharing it forward, and we get so much value out of these conversations ourselves, but producing a podcast isn't free.
We have personally invested in podcast equipment and video editing software, as well as dedicate our time to produce, edit, and distribute a new episode every week.
By becoming a podcast supporter, you will help us keep the podcast running smoothly and get access to amazing off-the-record conversations with seasoned artists, authors, art collectors, gallery and museum professionals, as well as industry leaders. These conversations offer even more valuable advice for artists at various stages of their career.
You also get access to our artist community platform and our gratitude for keeping the podcast going. Head on over to levelupartisthub.com to sign up and become a podcast supporter today. Welcome back. So as with anything, balance is key, and there are some potential drawbacks when it comes to excess procrastination. This can cause missed opportunities, including deadlines for exhibitions, maybe competitions or grants, other career building opportunities that have firm deadlines. They don't necessarily change based on a vacation that you need or a day of burnout that you have, resulting in having to take forced rest. So having that balance of making sure that those business activities are still happening while incorporating your breaks is super, super important. Plus, when it comes to the creative process, it can be a struggle to regain that focus and motivation when you come back from your break, especially if it's a long trip and a huge change of scenery. Coming back into the studio may be a little jarring at first because it's a new space again. You're like, I kind of forget for a moment how to interact in this space. And that's where a lot of the tips we talk about in other episodes and earlier about creative warm-ups, those kinds of things, reigniting your inspiration, are often super, super helpful, because after those extended periods of time away, you need to take that time to get back into your process.
Yeah. Yeah. And a little point of clarification, it's like if you're taking that vacation, with family and things like that, I mean, it might be that you need the break, and that's fine. We're definitely thinking about, like, let's say you do come from that vacation and now you're procrastinating going into the studio. That's the part you need to keep an eye out. And it can result in things like loss of momentum as well, where you're like having this challenge to maintain consistency, engagement, and productivity in your studio. Cause it's like you just came back, you're refreshed. Once again, you feel that looming mountain and you're like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. So you might have some of that resistance and then you're trying to get around it, which some strategies for trying to find that balance between that, is it procrastination? Is it a break? And actually getting back into your practice include actually establishing a routine. So you just got back from your vacation. A lot of times we need a vacation from the vacation. So give yourself a few days, give yourself some grace. You just flew back yesterday from a 12-hour flight. You don't have to go into the studio tomorrow morning. Like, come on, give yourself a little bit more than that. But, then you say, okay, I'm going to take it easy Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This coming week, I'm going to go into the studio. I'm going to, develop into my practice at X hour. You schedule that out and then you start that again. Setting realistic deadlines. Okay, so every Tuesday, I'm going to do outreach. Every Thursday, I'm going to work on applications and open calls and any exhibitions and artistic opportunities. This is when I'm going to go through the list and see what's out there, like research, and put on the calendar when you're going to apply to these things, which, hot tip, make that deadline sooner than what it says on it because life gets in the way. And if you have it on the calendar, speaking for myself, if you have it on the calendar on the actual deadline and life gets in the way and you're too tired, you're going to forget about it and you're going to miss it. Especially if procrastination or a little bit of burnout are in the conversation, chances are you're going to skip it even if you didn't intend to. So backdate that deadline at least a few days. And then the other thing is that's going to help you with all this is practicing self-awareness. So how do you feel? What's going on? If there's like personal stuff or family stuff going on, it's okay. It's okay to identify what it is, because then with that is how you can strategize to move past it, how you can plan to move past it. If you're not sure and there's a lot of things like neon signs going off and alarms blaring in the distance, it might be hard to figure out how to work around it. So definitely practice some of that self-awareness to try to figure out, where's this coming from? Where's this resistance coming from? So some other practical tips and techniques that we've used to help us, like when we come out of an extended time away from our practice, include, like I said, putting stuff on your calendar. Google Calendar, just about everybody has it. Visual timers, love those. They don't make a sound and they show you, how much time you've been working on something. You might just set that visual timer for 10 minutes of doodling, again, for something that does not necessarily have an end product, but it's to help you warm up. Setting the days of the week, like we mentioned. Also having accountability systems and peer support. If you have other artist friends, say, hey, can we meet one day a week? I need to push through this block that I'm feeling, and kind of talk about it and maybe like exchange some ideas on, how we can move past this and kind of get back into the zone, get back into that practice. After all, your art making practice is exactly that. It's a practice.
Exactly. And another practical tip when thinking about those breaks is making sure that you're very intentional with that time, not simply in recovery survival mode still, but intentionally taking those short breaks and doing something fun. Maybe it's a walk around your favorite park. Maybe it's indulging in a healthy snack that energizes you, stretching your body, waking your body up, or going on vacation that inspire you, whether to museums, to a new city, to a new culture. So being very intentional with those breaks and that you're actively choosing things that energize you and refuel you, because there are also trips, which again, whether it's family, friends, pre-commitments that you've already had, that we all know that feeling of coming back from a vacation and feeling like you need a vacation. There's always that difference of energizing activities versus maybe some draining activities. So making sure that when you come back from your break, you're in that energizing momentum, whether that's with people, by yourself, whether that's in a new place or leaning into a routine during your break, figuring out what works for you, which in other ways is really helpful. Hearing from other creatives, listening to podcasts like this, talking to other people of what works best for you during your breaks. What do you find out of the studio helps your in-studio practice?
Yeah, and from personal experience, I feel like it's better to come back from a longer than anticipated break, if you're trying to incorporate more rest, than trying to recover from burnout. At least with the former, you're somewhat refreshed, so you're not getting to crispy levels. But yeah, definitely take the time. If you're feeling resistance towards getting back to your work, you feel like it's been forever. I'm especially thinking of folks that say, I haven't picked up a paintbrush in 5 years, whatever that break looks like, maybe work, maybe personal life, whatever that looks like for you. I mean, give yourself some grace, but also try to identify, where is this coming from? Is this more procrastination, and overwhelm and maybe like some burnout or bad experiences in the past? Or do I just need a break? And that's fine to get a break and regather your ideas, regather your thoughts, your energies, and then go at it. But definitely make a plan to go ahead and execute and get back into your practice, even if it's a little bit at a time, to get that engine running again.
Exactly. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast of as small business owners and creatives, because we're also making the product, so to speak, that we are also then marketing and selling to collectors and to our audience. Our number one job as a small business owner is to take care of ourselves, because it's basically like quality control of your painting, right? Of your creative practice. And so it's our job to learn what energizes us. What do we need? How often do we need breaks? What kind of breaks? And so really challenging yourself to take that intentional time and figure out what works for you. Maybe you need a set system where, okay, I'm joining me, for example, a volleyball league every week because it's guaranteed time outside, it's guaranteed social time. And that's one of the best things I've done for my creative process, which sometimes they can feel in conflict with each other. But when you think about it, you're like, no, yes, it's time out of the studio, but this is actually the best thing I can do for my creative practice. So figuring out things that you can implement that energize you up and make your studio practice even better when you come back to it.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's conversation, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes. You can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artists on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartisthub.com if you want to check out our business community, and get access to the templates, resources, and course modules that we have put together to help creatives with their career goals.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.